Well, me, I'll come again. All right then. Love.
Going on exploration.
An exploration, wow.
Of Brixton. We're just gonna freestyle it.
It's an unusually hot summer's day in London, and our reporter George is in Brixton. We have just met Gianluca Rizzo, the man from Milan who's the managing director of the Brixton Business Improvement District, a group of businesses who voluntarily choose to tax themselves for additional services. Brixton is a neighbourhood in South London synonymous with style, music and resistance. It also happens to be home to one of the most successful business improvement districts, or BIDs, in the UK. The first of these districts was created over 50 years ago across the pond in Toronto, but they really took off in the 90s and early 2000s, with over 1,500 around the world today, from Singapore to South Africa and New Zealand to Denmark. But what is it that makes the model work? How is it being adopted in different nations? And what does it mean for our public spaces? I'm Peter Jordan, TOPOSOPHY's Head of Insights, and on this episode of Common Ground, we're in Brixton, London and Harlem, New York to find out what makes for a successful bid and to discover how the model is evolving from its baseline promises to address broader community challenges and much more. Stay with us.
This is a podcast by TOPOSOPHY. For more than a decade, TOPOSOPHY has been inspiring and informing its clients on how to transform places, whether they're neighbourhoods, cities, regions, or whole countries. The TOPOSOPHY team works with international organisations, multinational brands, and government agencies around the world, leading them every step of the way to find placemaking and marketing solutions that are built to last. As constantly curious people, the team loves to collect game-changing ideas that are transforming other sectors and draw valuable lessons for the future of places. This podcast series, curated by the TOPOSOPHY team, is just one example of how these valuable ideas are brought to life.
Brixton is a radical place, and I like to think in that way. I like to think of myself as a radical person as well.
We're back in Brixton with Gianluca.
For those people who are not familiar with Brixton, is the black capital of Britain. So it's been a place of activism and radicalism in terms of the thinking, in terms of, the change that Brixton has been driving, for not just locally, but for the country.
When HMS Windrush, the ship that brought over 1,000 Caribbeans to Britain, moored in London back in 1948, Brixton was the area where many of the new arrivals settled. Following some tough decades of racial tension, lack of opportunity, and persistent police brutality, in 1981, Brixton was the epicenter of riots which shook the whole country. These riots inspired protests across the UK. This strong history of activism and resistance can still be seen in the area today.
And Brixton is incredibly lucky to have incredible charities, social enterprises that all tackle issues around inclusivity, diversity, equality and justice. I refer to them as place values. So they're intrinsically embedded within the community and the businesses and the people who live here.
For Gianluca, it's a focus on these place values that sets the district apart from your standard bid.
Also, I stopped here 1 second on Core Double Lane, which is one of the other key streets that we have in Brixton. Just if you look up there, you could see our banners, and this is part of our campaign that we ran in 2020 after the murder of George Floyd. And in fact, we have 4 different messages. This one says, Black Lives Matter, a political and social movement emphasizing black and human rights and racial equality for black people and campaigning against various forms of racism. So this is part of the work that a bid has done. That is, I think we are the only bid that will do something like that.
Apart from focusing on making streets more walkable and jet washing pavements, the Brixton BID is working with all kinds of organisations, raising awareness for racial justice, promoting arts in the community, and campaigning on behalf of local independent businesses.
There is this perception from residents and businesses that shouldn't the council be doing that? And the answer is sadly not. we've been going through massive public sectors cuts and funds, and there is less and less investment into places, and somehow bids kind of sadly fill that gap.
Gianluca's right. Since 2010, the UK has been experiencing a form of political austerity, leading to severe cuts to public funding. In this period of time, the amount of bids in the nation has almost quadrupled. So, as state spending decreases, local areas have been forced to look for other ways to raise money. Add to this the calamity of the pandemic and a shift in shopping habits, and you can see why businesses are banding together to make their surrounding area as appealing as possible.
We have over 500 paying members, but we have probably 1,000 businesses. And actually, it's much easier for a politician, a local authority, the Mayor of London, Transport for London, Met Police to come and speak to me. So then it's my job to speak to all of my members. And then I'm lucky to have a very diverse board, and it's been designed in that way.
There's a long list of decision makers that sit on the Brixton board. The CEO of Brixton Brewery, the artistic director of Brixton House Theatre, and the owners of Impact Brixton, Europe's first black-owned co-working space, along with other business owners and representatives from the police, local government and Transport for London.
So these are all business owners or business managers who volunteer their time because they love Brixton, because they're committed to Brixton, and because they want to be part of the change, if you like.
In other words, business improvement districts, at least successful ones, rely on a wide range of voices being on the board.
Yes, Stafford, are you doing? You good?
Well, I'm Stafford the Great.
The greatest.
I have been in Brixton for 23 years. So I started in 2003, 19 years ago. I started trade from a mobile catering unit. My son, which is in the back. My son!
Hello, son.
Come here, my son. You got something on the fire? You're cooking? Chicken? Give me just 10 seconds. I won't let it burn. So we grew up from a mobile catering unit while my wife cooked at home while he was there wiggling away in the tummy. Now I am set. I am intent on creating more innovative ways of presenting the Jamaican cuisine. And we are now moving into our new dining room, which is currently under construction, that will house and present a total different way of how we eat, drink, and live. True community style.
Stafford's Jamaican restaurant Healthy Eaters is just one of the countless success stories of restaurants hailing from Brixton. Take Franco Manca, for example, born in Brixton Market 20 years ago and selling slices of pizza for £1. The brand is now a staple on high streets across the UK and has recently opened its first store overseas in Athens. It's businesses like Stafford's that make up the heart and soul of Brixton. During the pandemic, when hospitality was one of the industries that suffered most, Gianluca stepped up and was part of a number of bid directors who penned a letter to the then Chancellor of the UK asking for support. The bid also secured funding, worth £50,000, for 10 independent and culturally significant hospitality businesses through the Dine Local initiative. This is just one example of how the Brixton bid is providing more for its neighbourhood than just its baseline promises.
Yes, bids will do events, but it's more like traditional things like the Christmas light or Easter bunny trail, whatever. It's great. I'm not saying that those things are not important. I'm saying that, we were quite innovative in thinking about a way to bring two communities together to celebrate Black Britain and Black America, if you like.
Gianluca is talking about the Brixton Harlem Festival that took place in August 2022. The festival celebrated everything that makes these two neighbourhoods unique and invited board members from the Harlem bid to Brixton to take part in a jam-packed weekend of tours, concerts, film showings, talks, live music and much more. As well as these events being open to the public, it was a chance for the two bids to discuss and share best practices. These kinds of field trips are common amongst bids, but organising a festival is new territory, and so is the twinning of the two districts.
So at a time where Brexit Britain, and a few years ago when we did the twinning, it was Trump America, where there was quite a lot of division. We wanted to send the opposite message of unity, of community, and that's why we came together, and that's why we're doing the festival.
When the death of George Floyd in 2020 sparked protests in many cities around the world, both the Harlem and Brixton BIDs sprung into action, with the two districts running campaigns to show their support for the Black Lives Matter movement. Noticing what Barbara Askins was doing in Harlem, Gianluca reached out.
Barbara Askins, she's a BID legend. She's a legend, full stop. But she also happened to be running a BID in New York City, Harlem BID.
The cities twin all the time. New York and London is twin. But no BIDs have done any twinning to where we promote each other, share common grounds, and learn from each other.
That's Barbara Askins, the legend herself.
The whole twinning is, how do we create a global, hyper-local marketing campaign that ultimately could end up with trade and collaborations between these two iconic communities that have influenced the world through the contributions made through history, arts, and culture. So we had the conversation, and we were trying to figure out, how do we work together on some of these common things? They deal with gentrification, social justice, small businesses, the culture that came to Brixton that changed London and a lot of the UK. Just like we just have so many similarities. But then Gianluca was fortunate enough to get a grant from the government to create a Harlem Brixton festival as a part of the twinning. And one part of that whole festival thing involves research, where we're doing research to show the similarities between Harlem and Brixton.
So, what exactly are those similarities? To understand this, we need to learn more about Harlem.
Harlem is a very special neighborhood to many people. It's special to those who live here, to those who work, to those who visit, as well as to those who do business. Yes, we did have Malcolm X there, and Adam Clayton Powell, and Martin Luther King came through, Marcus Garvey. People in Harlem still talk about that. The entertainers that came to Harlem, the restaurants that were there, the way people dress, the style and sound, the style and music, the style and dance.
As with its British twin, Harlem's story is one of migration. In the early 20th century, African American families from the South moved north to cities like New York. During this time, Harlem experienced what has been dubbed as a renaissance, with writers like Langston Hughes, political figures like Marcus Garvey, and musicians like Louis Armstrong all at some point calling the neighbourhood home. This golden period is said to have laid the foundations for the civil rights movement that started some 50 years later.
125th Street is not just this great commercial district. It is a great commercial district that sits in the middle of a historical Harlem cultural mecca.
During the 90s, Harlem experienced a different kind of renaissance. After decades of neglect, resulting in poor housing, bad education, exploitative landlords, crime, and a dwindling population, the government finally took action. They decided to auction off houses under the market value in the hope that people would be incentivized to move to the neighborhood and revitalize it. Barbara was one of those people.
I had moved to Harlem because there was a movement. It was a concentrated movement by those who were the leaders at that time to rebuild a lot of the housing stock and to market to people of color who had higher income. So there was a big effort on redoing the housing, and someone told me about an apartment, And I went to look at it. It was fantastic. It was spiral staircases and jacuzzis and fireplaces. I was like, oh my God, look at what's going on in Harlem.
It was amidst this period of change that the BID was set up. 30 years later, New York City is no stranger to BIDs. In fact, it has 76 of them, covering 93,000 businesses and investing some $170 million into local economies. But the 125th Street BID was one of the first in Harlem.
It started for small areas that needed to pool their money together in order to basically sustain themselves. And that concept was fascinating to me. The area was dirty. Sanitation, litter. There was so much litter on the street. We didn't have a street cleaning. It was the responsibility of the store owners. Store owners could not keep the streets clean while they were managing their businesses. The crime was up. At that time, we had a lot of larcenies, grand larcenies on the street and from the stores. So it was very dark at night. We had homelessness on the streets. People were living in cardboard and they were using the trash cans to burn fires to be there. You had all of this happening. You couldn't attract, other stores. So we were it was an oversaturation of fruit stands, cheap jewelry, fish markets, 99-cent stores. So the customer base on the street was different.
Since the BID's inception, Harlem has undergone immense change and regeneration. But how do you ensure that your BID is received well?
So we looked at that property owners who are multiple property owners or multiple store owners, because they would be paying more. We looked at those who were the smallest, because that would be a bigger burden for them to take on this. And we brought them into the process to help us to shape this out.
Once the BID was set up, it opened a world of formalised public-private partnership that beforehand just wasn't possible.
Before we were a BID, we would be making more phone calls to get a response than after we were a BID. And I think it is because of the formal structure. And so it's almost like a quasi-government, but locally controlled by business people through its setup that goes into play. And that doesn't happen when you're just a loosely structured Merchants Association.
The 125th Street BID is now going above and beyond its standard services, working on promoting and marketing the area.
It's not just all the bad things. We always get the news channel stuff about shooting on 125th Street. Somebody pushed in front of a train, but the parts that we don't get, and this is what our marketing is about now, how do we capture all this great culture that's walking down the street? And people don't realize that some of our icons who have transitioned, their kids are still here. They're doing things, they own businesses, they're living the principles of their parents. And we're looking for ways of how to package that, in terms of moving forward with our marketing.
Capturing this culture is part of the process of getting people to spend more of their time and money in places like Brixton and Harlem. Both BIDs are actively devising ways to market, promote, and rebrand the image of their place, which in turn, of course, benefits the local visitor economy. It's nothing new. The BID model has been adapted in different ways by the tourism sector for a while.
The BIDs have worked. They've been very successful in the US and in Canada and in the UK.
That's John Lambeth, CEO and founder of Civitas.
And that led to the tourism industry looking at this model and saying, could we use the same kind of model for our tourism promotion and our destination management kinds of activities? And the answer was yes. it is very much like a business improvement district. In fact, it may use the same law as the business improvement district does, but instead of assessing all of the businesses or property owners in a downtown area, we'll assess only the hotels or only tourism-related businesses in a citywide or countywide district. And instead of using that money for clean and safe activities, we'll use that money for tourism promotion activities or destination management activities or destination development activities, actually building more amenities and more attractions in our destination.
With the pandemic exposing the vulnerabilities of places that rely heavily on the visitor economy, destination marketing and management organisations are realising the potential of diversifying their funds. A 2021 survey showed that almost 2/3 are now looking towards alternative methods of funding beyond their local government. John might portray bids as being easily adaptable to different sectors and locations, but that's not always the case. There are plenty of examples where the model has failed. Delays in planned spending, claims of fraudulent balloting, and a lack of transparency are among the main reasons. A report from 2019 recommended introducing regulation standards for bids. They listed transparency, accountability, and democratic decision-making among the most important factors to consider when assessing a district's success. Beyond the adaptability of the model, there is also a question of ethics. The fiercest critics argue that bids enforce image-oriented policy and result in a Disneyfication of town centres, driving away non-consumers, displacing casual traders and the homeless. In short, they focus on disguising problems rather than working on solutions. Some commentators suggest that packaging a place's cultural identity as a commodity leads to gentrification and can even drive class and ethnic conflict.
I would say over the last 10, 15 years, Brixton has undergone like a massive change. Many factors, I would say, relatively affordable Victorian housing stock. And one of the key drivers has actually been the tube station. So Brixton has become attractive for quite a lot of new residents, I guess, who could afford to buy fairly decent price houses. And that kind of kickstarted the whole process of change.
Over the past 5 years, property prices in Brixton have surged by 76%, forcing locals out and putting the culture, diversity and character of the place at risk.
But we need to think about Brixton as a wider community. Despite, going through a lot of, change, it's still one of the most deprived wards. Like we have within the town centre, one of the most deprived wards in the country, high level of inequalities and poverty. So we want to make sure that the opportunities that we have through regeneration and change, locals have access to it. We don't want to create displacement from a residential point of view and from a business point of view.
Gianluca emphasises that he is anti-displacement, and the initiatives the BID has helped launch are testament to this. But he also admits that there are some things that even business improvement districts can't help with.
This was like where we are, literally like the spotlight of the Save the Arches campaign, and the gentrification narrative, because
the Brixton Arches were a collection of trading units located underneath the Brixton railway station bridge. In 2015, Network Rail announced refurbishments, giving traders just months to leave the arches. Eviction notices were served, and there was a proposed 300% hike in rent. The battle between tenants and the railway company lasted for over 3 years, ending in 2018 when all tenants, over 30 businesses, were eventually evicted. Today, 7 years after the announcement, only 2 of the original traders have been able to reopen there: a fabric store and a pawnbrokers, while other national retailers and bars have started popping up. However, the majority of the lots remain empty.
But this is one example of things that is outside our control, I guess. There is nothing that we can do. We've been lobbying to get some of these units back up and open, to have affordable commercial rent. It's not happening.
Though the Brixton BID has been lobbying to get these businesses back, some of its critics would argue that its push for regeneration is not too dissimilar from National Rail's development of the Brixton Arches. Walking around Brixton, among the family-owned Eritrean vegan cafes and the Colombian eateries, Gianluca points out that several national and even international hospitality brands have opened in the area. However, he believes that having these different kinds of businesses alongside each other doesn't necessarily have to cause division.
How I've been trying to handle this situation is by being inclusive. And what I mean is to move away from these new Brixton and old Brixton. I want to think of Brixton as one place for everyone. I want to think of Brixton as a place where our job is also to protect and preserve the traditional core businesses that have been part of the community for 20, 30 years, but also we need to be inclusive. We need to welcome new businesses. I want to think of bids in some case, but in a place like Brixton for sure, almost like a Robin Hood. You take from, the nationals and you kind of redistribute some of that for the small independent businesses, which is what Brixton is about. We have micro and small businesses, 80-90% of our membership is family-run independent businesses. I always say we can't do a Brexit on it. We can just look away, check out and pretend it's not happening, and we've got to sit at the table and influence change.
So, what lessons do we at TOPOSOPHY take from all this? Firstly, when managed well, bids can provide a much-needed boost to what we call a micro-destination, such as a street, a commercial area, or even a neighbourhood. As bids are private sector-led, processes such as responding to consumer demand, decision-making, procurement, and hiring staff tend to be much faster than traditional governance methods like local councils. It can also help to free up decision-making from the demands of the local electoral cycle. Yet, secondly, this points to one of the largest potential downsides in the way that bids work. What's good for local businesses isn't always good for local residents. This is particularly the case when thinking about tourism improvement districts, since problems with over-tourism are a frequent reminder that commercialisation and crowding can be a big burden on local people's quality of life. Since we're talking about public spaces, transparency and accountability in the way funds are spent are essential too. So, bids need some essential ingredients to work. Since requirements differ according to local conditions, it makes sense to start by addressing simple common goals, such as keeping the streets clean, before taking on more complex activities like concerts and community events, or even marketing and rebranding. As we've seen in both Brixton and Harlem, bids can also draw on local shared history and identity as powerful catalysts for bringing common interests together. This shows how bids can support their local communities while attracting more shoppers and visitors too. Finally, this shows the value of partnering with organisations that have deeper community links and that work on critical issues such as inclusivity and diversity. Community engagement can also increase the range of people who feel invested in a particular place, benefiting both the local government and businesses. After all, a key tenet of placemaking is about bringing people together and focusing on community well-being, a subject that TOPOSOPHY has recently covered in its landmark report on the placemaking and marketing organisation with the City Destinations Alliance.
To be at the table with the right people that might be coming from outside, might be pushing unwanted change onto us. But if we can't stop it, I think I've got to be pragmatic and sit down and make it work as much as possible for the community and for the values that we have.
It's not what you, the executive director, or a few of your property owners want. It's what the collective wants. That's where the success comes in. Because what you will find is people will provide to you ideas that you hadn't thought of, which is what makes it great.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of Common Ground by TOPOSOPHY. It was developed and produced by the Greek Podcast Project, with production assistance from Gaia Lutz, and it was curated by our team at TOPOSOPHY. Next time on Common Ground.
In the past, there was this sort of trajectory that people had to their lives. They were young, then they would go to college, they got a career, they'd work at the career, maybe a single employer for a very long time, and then they would retire and they'd play golf and die. But what happens is that now it's not a crazy idea for somebody 50 to believe that they're going to live to 100.
We discover how a change in attitudes, expectations, and lifestyles are redefining what it means to be an older adult in the 21st century, and how our cities, communities, and homes are adapting to an aging population.